All right, let's dive in. There's been this hum in the air,
Yeah.
a real sense of anticipation after years of whispers, reports, even some official nods. The Nintendo Switch 2 is finally here. It feels like a pretty big moment, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
The original Switch, I mean, it changed the game, sold over 146 million units worldwide. That's a that's a tough act to follow.
It truly is. And you've given us a fantastic stack of sources here, articles, reports, leaked details, everything we need to really understand the lead up to this June 5th launch.
Exactly. So our mission in this deep dive is clear.
Yeah.
We're going to cut through the noise, pull out the most important insights from the material you've provided us with.
Yeah.
We'll make sense of the tech, highlight the surprises, and basically get you completely clued in on what the Switch 2 launch is all about, straight from these sources.
Right. No outside speculation, just what the sources are telling us.
Precisely.
Think of us as like your guides through this pile of information. We'll explain the details, connect the dots, help you understand what really matters.
Perfect. So let's kick things off with the big picture that these sources paint. The release, the price, and that very first look we got.
Okay, so the firm release date, confirmed across your sources, is June 5th, 2025, for most major regions anyway. It's finally happening this week.
Finally. And the initial unveiling wasn't actually that long ago, was it? According to the sources, January 16th, 2025, we got a first glimpse. What did they show us then?
Yeah, that was the initial teaser reveal. The sources mention it showed off the console's general design and notably those new magnetic Joy-Cons attaching to the side. We also saw a brief, pretty tantalizing clip of a new Mario Kart game.
Okay, so the magnetic Joy-Cons right out of the gate. That definitely got people talking. But the real bombshell, or maybe the controversial moment, according to these reports, came later with the price.
Absolutely. The full reveal, detailing specs and the price, that came on April 2nd via a Nintendo Direct, and the sources make it very clear. That introductory price of US $449.99 became the immediate focus of discussion and, well, criticism.
Price is always sensitive, but the sources report this was particularly contentious. Why was that?
Well, it's a significant jump. The sources really highlight this. It's 50% more expensive than the original Switch's launch price of $299. And not only that, but game prices are also going up. Sources report they can be up to 33% more expensive than original Switch titles.
Wow, that combination feels like a real double whammy for the wallet. The sources leaned into how strong the fan reaction was too, right?
So, yeah.
Talking about chat floods during the Treehouse streams and even former PR managers calling it a crisis moment.
They did. It's clear the sources see this price point as a major challenge Nintendo faces right at launch. One former PR manager is quoted expressing surprise at the level of immediate negative feedback, suggesting Nintendo might have been caught a bit off guard, maybe had a war room situation trying to manage the outrage described in those chat logs.
It's fascinating that the sources paint such a vivid picture of that reaction. We'll definitely circle back to how that played out later, especially with, the pre-order demand. But putting the price aside for just a moment, the sources do confirm the console itself maintains that core hybrid identity.
Yes, absolutely. That fundamental design is preserved. It's still a system you can use handheld, prop up in tabletop mode, or, dock it to play on your TV, just like the original. The sources note the overall form factor is similar, even if the components inside are, well, significantly updated. And the code name that leaked out for the system was Ounce.
Ounce. Interesting. Okay, let's open up Ounce then and see what the sources say is actually inside. Hardware upgrades, what's the rundown there? What are the guts like?
Right, starting with the screen, the sources detail a larger 7.9-inch LCD touchscreen, so an upgrade from both previous Switch models in size.
I was a bit surprised they didn't go OLED again.
Yeah.
After the success of the Switch OLED model.
Yeah.
What does the sources say about that choice?
Yeah, it's a good question. It also says, quote, the hardware design lead, Tetsuya Sasaki. He explained that Nintendo opted for LCD despite the OLED option being available. He cited advancements in LCD technology, specifically mentioning support for HDR10 on this new screen.
Okay, HDR.
And the resolution is higher too, 1920 by 1080 when handheld or tabletop. That means a sharper image, 279 pixels per inch. Plus, it supports a variable refresh rate up to 120 hertz.
Okay, so maybe not OLED, but definitely significant improvements. Resolution, HDR, and that smoother variable refresh rate. That sounds like a really noticeable step up for playing handheld. What about power, the engine under the hood?
The sources confirm a custom NVIDIA processor. Now, Nintendo hasn't released the full, granular specs, but some sources referencing leaked details considered pretty reliable point to 12 GB of LPDDR5X RAM and 256 GB of UFS 3.1 storage.
12 gigs of RAM. That sounds like a really big deal, especially compared to the original Switch's 4 GB. How do the sources interpret the significance of that jump?
Well, analysts quoted in the sources seem to think this RAM increase is potentially huge, like transformative for third-party game compatibility. More RAM basically provides more headroom for developers to port games from consoles like PlayStation and Xbox, which, often require more memory. It could really broaden the types of games we see.
Where it directly addresses a frequent point of feedback on the original Switch.
Okay.
Okay. And when it's docked, does it push the visuals even further?
It does. The sources state that in TV mode, the console can output up to 4K resolution at 60 Hz. Or you can go for 1440p or 1080p resolutions at a higher 120 Hz refresh rate, also with HDR10 support.
So for those with compatible TVs, you could get smoother motion or higher resolution when playing docked. Nice. Any improvements to the dock itself?
Yep, a couple of practical additions noted in the sources. The dock now has a built-in Ethernet port, which is great for more stable wired online connections, and it includes a cooling fan, presumably to help manage the increased heat from the more powerful processor when it's docked and working hard.
Smart additions. Okay, beyond the screen and the guts, what about the physical console itself? Any notable changes there?
It weighs in at 534 grams, that's about 18.8 ounces. A significant and maybe somewhat surprising physical change is the addition of a second USB-C port. You've got the standard one on the bottom for docking and power, but there's a new one right on the top of the unit.
A second USB-C port on the top. That feels unusual for a handheld. Do the sources shed any light on why Nintendo might have added that?
Yeah, sources referencing developer comments and leaks offer a few possibilities. One idea is improved ergonomics, like being able to charge while playing handheld without a cable sticking out the bottom, which can be awkward. Another is supporting peripherals or maybe future attachments. Some speculation in the sources even ties it to concepts like, future Labo-style accessories or maybe a secondary screen attachment.
Interesting.
Or it might just provide a dedicated port for accessories separate from charging. Who knows for sure yet? The sources also point out a built-in microphone with noise cancellation, which is a first for the console itself.
A built-in mic definitely changes things for multiplayer chat. What about standard connectivity stuff? Wi-Fi, Bluetooth.
You've got Wi-Fi 6 for faster wireless, standard Bluetooth, and NFC, for Amiibo support. And the sources mention support for the newer, faster microSD Express cards for expanding storage.
Got it. So hardware-wise, it sounds like a pretty comprehensive upgrade, addressing both performance and usability. Now, let's talk about those new controllers we saw in the teaser of the Joy-Con 2. What are the big changes according to the sources?
Well, the most obvious physical change is how they attach. Instead of sliding onto a rail like the old ones, they connect magnetically.
Magnetic attachment. Feels kind of sleek. Are there any new buttons or sensors?
Yes, there's a new C button on the face of the right Joy-Con 2, and the sensors are enhanced. Both the left and right Joy-Con 2 now include an accelerometer, gyroscope, and a mouse sensor.
Okay, wait, the mouse sensor again? That still sounds a bit cryptic. Do the sources actually explain what that mouse sensor does? Or what it enables in terms of gameplay?
Honestly, this is one area where the sources are a little light on specific detail. They confirm it's there on both controllers as a new feature, but they don't really provide concrete examples of how it'll be used in games. The hands-on report mentions potential mouse controls generally, but nothing specific. So based just on the sources we have, its exact function and purpose isn't really fully defined yet. Still a bit of a mystery.
Huh. That's surprising for a new piece of hardware right at launch. Something to watch out for then. Now, here's where backward compatibility kind of bumps into the controller discussion. The sources make it really clear the new Joy-Con 2 are missing some features from the original. What are they, and how does that affect playing old games?
Right, this is a critical point. The Joy-Con 2 lack the IR motion camera that was on the original right Joy-Con, and they have a reduced level of force feedback vibration compared to the original's full volume HD rumble.
The IR camera, I remember that being used for some unique stuff.
Yeah.
Which games specifically rely on that, according to the sources?
Okay, so the sources list several titles that require the IR motion camera, and, well, they won't fully work with just the new Joy-Con 2. These include games like 1-2 Switch, specific modes in Game Builder Garage, certain training modes in Dr. Kawashima's Brain Training, and some micro games in WarioWare. Move It. Also, the Joy-Con 2 don't fit the leg strap accessory used in Nintendo Switch Sports.
Right, so if you own those games and want to play them on your new Switch 2, you'll need your old Joy-Cons. Is that the deal?
Precisely. The sources confirm that original Switch Joy-Cons can connect wirelessly to the Switch 2 console, so that allows you to play these specific games or modes that need the old features.
Okay, that's a necessary workaround, I guess.
Yeah.
But there's a crucial limitation tied to that workaround, isn't there? Something about charging them.
Yes, and this is a key detail the sources really emphasize. Original Switch Joy-Cons cannot be charged by attaching them to the Switch 2 console itself. Not magnetically, not any other way. You'll need to use your original Switch console or maybe a separate accessory like a charging grip or stand to keep them powered up if you plan to use them with the Switch 2.
Okay, that's definitely something existing Switch owners need to be aware of. You can use your old Joy-Cons for those specific games, but you absolutely need a separate charging solution for them.
Got it. And the reduced vibration you mentioned, how does that impact things?
Yeah, the sources note that the lower force feedback vibration in the Joy-Con 2 might impact mini games that rely really heavily on very specific subtle vibrations, like the Joy-Con hide-and-seek mode in Everybody 1-2 Switch.
So while the new controllers have new tech and that cool magnetic feel, there are some definite considerations if you want, like full backward compatibility with games relying on those specific old Joy-Con features. What about entirely new features that are enabled by the new hardware? Well, that new C button on the right Joy-Con 2 is tied directly to a significant new feature called Game Chat.
Game chat. Okay, what is that exactly, according to the sources?
Game Chat is essentially a built-in voice chat and screen sharing feature. The sources actually provide a pretty interesting origin story for it. They trace it back to Nintendo developers struggling during the pandemic, using awkward setups to try and share screens while playing together remotely. The goal was apparently to recreate that feeling of bringing your consoles together and playing side by side.
Huh, that's a neat idea, capturing that communal play feeling, even remotely.
Oh.
Does it support video?
Yes, Game Chat supports video calls if you connect an optional webcam, and the sources say it supports third-party cameras, which is pretty convenient.
Okay. And how is Nintendo planning to roll this out from a business perspective? Is it free or?
It's free initially. The sources state Game Chat will be free to use until March 31st, 2026. After that date, though, it will require a paid Nintendo Switch Online membership.
All right, so a free trial period, basically. Then it becomes part of the subscription service. Makes sense. Okay, moving from features to software. What does the game lineup and third-party support look like at launch and beyond, based on what the sources are telling us?
Well, the sources confirm one major first-party launch title, Mario Kart World. It's described as an open world or maybe off-road based take on Mario Kart, which sounds quite different from previous entries.
An open-world Mario Kart. That definitely catches the ear. Sounds
Yeah.
ambitious. Any other first-party titles right on day one?
Yes, there's also Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour. The sources describe this as a digital-only launch title. Its purpose seems to be acting as an interactive guide and tech demo. Basically, an engaging tutorial that walks you through the new hardware features and explains the technical jargon using mini-games and interactive bits.
That's a very Nintendo approach, isn't it? Onboarding users to a new system like that. What about bigger upcoming first-party titles we already know are in development, like Metroid or Pokemon?
Good question. Sources indicate that major upcoming games like Metroid Prime 4, Beyond, and Pokemon Legends, ZA will actually launch simultaneously on both the original Switch and the Switch 2. However, the Switch 2 versions will be labeled Nintendo Switch 2 editions and will have graphical and performance enhancements mentioned.
Oh.
The sources also mention that the next generation of core Pokemon games is planned for simultaneous release on both consoles as well.
Interesting that they're supporting both consoles for some time, especially with a huge franchise like Pokemon.
Yeah.
What about third-party support? That was such a big part of the original Switch's success story.
Yeah, the sources report pretty strong third-party interest. Developer surveys mentioned show significant studios are interested, and some are already working on titles for the Switch 2.
And Nintendo seems to have made a specific move to kind of bolster that, right? An acquisition.
Yes, exactly. The acquisition of Shiver Entertainment is highlighted in the sources. This move was specifically aimed at helping port and optimize third-party games for the Switch 2, with Shiver apparently assisting external developers.
That feels like a really strategic response to ensure robust third-party support from day one. What specific third-party games are confirmed or, heavily rumored by the sources?
Well, Microsoft has committed to bringing Xbox games to the Switch 2 as part of their whole multi-platform strategy now. Examples cited in the sources include Halo, the Master Chief Collection, and Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. Plus, they have that legally binding agreement to bring the Call of Duty franchise to Nintendo platforms.
Xbox games on Switch too. That's definitely a noteworthy development. What about other major publishers? Ubisoft, maybe?
Ubisoft is mentioned as being particularly enthusiastic after seeing the console. Reportedly, they're in love with it. Rumors from the sources suggest they are targeting a launch window release for both Assassin's Creed Mirage and Assassin's Creed Shadows.
Ubisoft has a long history with Nintendo platforms, so that can attract. Anyone else mentioned?
Let's see. The developer of Marvel Rivals has expressed interest and confirmed they have development kits, though they did state they'd only release the game if the performance meets their standards, which is fair. Other titles linked to the console in various sources include My Time at Evershine, Yooka Replay Lee, and Power Wash Simulator 2. And one source even mentioned a gut feeling about Elden Ring making an appearance, though, they presented that as pure speculation, not a solid report.
Right. So a mix of new first-party, cross-gen major titles, and definitely a promising start for third-party support with some big names in there. Now, let's tackle the elephant in the room for many existing Switch owners. Backward compatibility. Playing your existing game library. What do the sources say about playing your old games on the Switch 2?
Okay, so Nintendo's official stance, which is reiterated across the sources, is that the Switch 2 aims for backward compatibility with most Switch games. And that covers both physical cartridges and your digital downloads.
Most is definitely the key word there. How does this backward compatibility actually work, though? According to the technical details in the sources, is it simply running original Switch hardware inside or something?
No, it sounds more complex than that. The sources describe it differently. Hardware director Takuhiro Dota is quoted saying it's somewhere in between a software emulator and hardware compatibility. And Tetsuya Sasaki clarified it further, calling it an emulation akin to a translation layer that processes the original game data in real time.
An emulation or translation layer.
Ah.
Huh. That sounds complicated. Does this method offer any advantages over just, like, pure emulation?
Well, according to the sources, this specific emulation approach can potentially allow original Switch games to leverage some Switch 2 features. For example, they mentioned they might be able to utilize the new game chat functionality when played on the Switch 2 console.
Okay, so maybe enhanced old games in some small ways.
Yeah.
But what's the practical reality of this system? Based on Nintendo's own testing reported in the sources, how well does it actually work?
Right. Nintendo provided some specific numbers from their testing. Out of 122 first-party Switch games tested, all were found to be compatible except the Nintendo Labo VR kit. And that incompatibility is purely physical. The Switch 2 console is just a different size and doesn't fit inside the cardboard VR accessory.
Gotcha. So Labo VR is a known casualty. What about the massive library of third-party games? Thousands of them.
Yeah, they tested over 15,000 third-party Switch games. The results showed approximately 75% of those were compatible without issues. About 170 games apparently experienced some problems or incompatibilities.
75% is pretty solid, but that still leaves, like, a quarter of third-party games, potentially thousands, and those 170 with issues.
Were any specific non-game apps mentioned as incompatible?
Yes, the sources specifically mentioned that during testing, some streaming or media apps, citing Hulu and Crunchyroll by name, were found to be incompatible at that time. Okay, so summing up the backward compatibility for you, the listener. Most of your existing Switch game library, both physical and digital, should work on the Switch 2. That's the good news. However, games needing the IR camera or specific accessories like Labo VR won't work, or they'll require you to use, and remember to separately charge, your original Switch Joy-Cons. And a small percentage of third-party games, plus maybe some apps, might also have issues or just not work at all. It sounds good overall, but maybe not perfectly seamless.
That's the nuanced reality the source is present, yeah. It's clearly a major effort by Nintendo to make it happen, but it's not without specific limitations because of the hardware differences between the consoles.
All right, we've covered the hardware, the features, the games, backward compatibility. Let's look at the slightly chaotic road to launch itself, the announcements, the pre-orders, and how that all played out according to these sources.
Okay. We already mentioned the Jan 16th teaser and the April 2nd full reveal via the Nintendo Direct. This was followed by Treehouse streams diving deeper into features, and then tryout events for press and some lucky fans worldwide from April through June.
The sources also make a point of highlighting Nintendo's visible efforts to combat scalping and manage demand this time around, right? Which is a huge issue with PS5 and Xbox.
They certainly do. Measures mentioned include Nintendo reportedly stockpiling hundreds of thousands of units in the U.S. market, partly maybe to mitigate potential tariff impacts, but also just to improve launch stock levels. They also apparently shifted some production and part sourcing away from China, more towards Southeast Asia.
Okay.
And on the sales side, sources pointed to strategies like Japan's region-locked retail model, though they had an online region-free version too, and implementing a pre-order waitlist system through the Nintendo account with specific requirements, trying to deter bots and resellers.
So they were definitely trying different tactics this time. And speaking of tariffs, the sources mentioned that actually affected the US and Canada pre-orders.
Yes, the timing of potential new tariffs apparently led to a delay for US and Canada pre-orders. They were initially planned for April 5th, but got pushed back to April 24th to allow Nintendo to, quote, assess the potential impact.
Did that tariff situation ultimately impact the console's price at launch? Or did they absorb it?
The sources indicate the console price itself remained fixed at that controversial $449.99 launch price. However, some official accessories did see price increases, maybe between $5 and $10, reportedly as a result.
Okay, so the main hardware price was locked in, but some peripheral costs went up. And when pre-orders finally did go live on April 24th in the US and Canada, how did it go? According to the sources, smooth sailing.
Not exactly. Despite Nintendo's efforts and, the higher price point, the demand was just overwhelming. Sources describe widespread website errors, crashes, immediate sellouts across major retailers like Walmart, Target, Best Buy, all within minutes of going live shortly after midnight ET. GameStop also reported glitches when their pre-order started later that day. It sounded like chaos.
Yeah, sounds like the familiar story of high-demand tech launches, even with all those mitigating efforts. What was the situation like in Japan? Any better?
In Japan, demand was also exceptionally high. Nintendo actually cautioned customers that over 2.2 million people had registered for the chance to pre-order the region-locked model there. That number apparently far exceeded their expectations. They warned that not all of those registrations could likely be fulfilled by launch day. And similar warnings about potential launch day delivery delays due to high demand were issued for U.S. customers pre-ordering directly through Nintendo's own store.
Wow, so the demand was just absolutely massive, leading to the predictable pre-order rush and stock issues pretty much globally. And some people even got their hands on the console a little early.
That's right. Sources report that some retailers received consoles in late May, and a small number of lucky customers who pre-ordered actually got them up to 2 weeks before the official June 5th launch. However, and this is key, the sources specify that these early units required a mandatory day one software patch just to become usable. You couldn't just play out of the box early.
A day one patch, just a function, that adds another little wrinkle to the launch story. And we have to revisit that strong negative reaction to the price we discussed earlier. How does the picture painted by the sources connect that initial price crisis moment, as they called it, with the later, overwhelming demand? It seems contradictory.
That's one of the really fascinating tensions highlighted in the sources, isn't it? On one hand, you have these reports of fan outrage, the flooded chats, the former PR people calling it a crisis, suggesting Nintendo might have miscalculated or even panicked. But then, on the other hand, the pre-order numbers clearly show this massive, maybe even underestimated, underlying demand for the console.
So what do the sources suggest about this apparent contradiction? Was the outrage just loud but not deep? Or did the demand come from a specific segment, like the super dedicated fans who'd buy it anyway?
Yeah, the sources don't definitively resolve that tension. Some speculate that the initial outrage might have been, the loudest voices online, not necessarily representative of the entire potential buyer base. Others suggest that despite the price, the perceived value from the technical upgrades, combined with the appeal of a new Mario Kart and the promise of backward compatibility, was just enough to drive core fans to secure a pre-order regardless of the cost. It really suggests the market for a new Nintendo console is incredibly strong, perhaps strong enough to absorb a higher price point for certain buyers, even if that initial sticker shock generated significant negative press and that vocal fan reaction we saw reported in the sources.
Right. It highlights how complex launch dynamics really are. Initial reaction isn't always indicative of eventual sales numbers, especially with Nintendo fans. Okay, let's shift gears slightly to early impressions from those who actually got hands-on time with the console before launch, as mentioned in the sources. What was the feel of the device like?
Well, the sources that had hands-on time really emphasized that the Switch 2 felt immediately familiar but refined, like a better version of what they already knew. It was described as feeling like a better handheld than the original, with improved, more responsive analog sticks. The plastic texture was noted as slightly grainy, which apparently added to a comfortable grip. One person even described it poetically as feeling like settling into a den they had already dug with the original Switch, just, nicer.
A comfortable den. That suggests it really maintains that core ergonomic appeal while making those small but welcome improvements. What about its potential for more demanding games? Did it
Yeah.
feel more capable?
Yeah, the hands-on reports definitely give the impression that the Switch 2 is noticeably more capable for running demanding titles than the original ever was. While they obviously couldn't do full, rigorous testing in those limited sessions, the initial performance felt promising for games that might have struggled or just couldn't run on the old hardware.
And how did the core Switch experience, the hybrid nature, the communal aspect? How did that feel with the new hardware?
The reports stress that even without a ton of completely novel ideas beyond features like game chat, the console really excels at just enhancing the familiar Switch experience, making it better. It apparently felt particularly strong as a communal device for playing with friends. The example given was the sheer joy of playing four-player Mario Kart World split screen, even if they noted there were occasional frame rate drops in that specific scenario.
So the fundamental appeal of the Switch is still very much present and maybe even improved by that hardware boost for local multiplayer. How did the new GameCat feature feel in practice during the hands-on? Did it work well?
The reports suggest Game Chat definitely adds to the community feel, making it easier to communicate and share screens, which is cool. However, it was also described as potentially being a bit hectic during actual gameplay, suggesting it might take some getting used to or maybe have some limitations in really intense moments. Needs more real-world testing, probably.
Right. And for new users or even existing ones navigating all these changes, that welcome tour game seems pretty important.
Yes, the sources confirm the Welcome Tour really acts as that interactive tutorial, making it easier for players to understand the new tech features, the game chat setup, other aspects of the system, without just having to read a dry manual.
Yeah, that's a good way to ease people into the new capabilities.
Mhm.
Smart move. So bringing all of this information together from the sources we've unpacked today, what's the overall picture of the Nintendo Switch 2 launch that emerges?
Well, based on this deep dive into all the source material you provided, the Switch 2 is presented as a really substantial technical upgrade. The focus is clearly on a better screen, significantly more power under the hood, and increased storage. It refines that highly successful hybrid design, adding practical features like the magnetic Joy-Cons, the built-in mic, those dual USB-C ports, and the new game chat feature for online play.
It sounds less like a total revolution and more like a very, very strong evolution of the original concept.
Exactly. Backward compatibility is obviously a major part of its value proposition, with most of the existing library working. But, as we discussed, there are those specific exceptions and caveats around games needing the IR camera and the need to separately charge original Joy-Cons if you want to use them for those titles.
Right, and the launch itself was definitely a study in contrast, wasn't it? Marked by that significant, very vocal negative reaction to the price early on, but simultaneously demonstrating just overwhelming demand, leading to those quick sellouts despite Nintendo's efforts to manage stock and try to deter scalpers.
Yeah, the key takeaways from the sources really seem to be it's a more powerful, more refined Switch that keeps the core concept completely intact. The price is a significant hurdle that's highlighted repeatedly in the sources. And while backward compatibility is broadly supported, you really need to be aware of those specific quirks and limitations. It's basically designed to do what the original did, but better, and with the technical muscle and modern features needed for current and future games.
So, for you listening right now, maybe thinking about the Switch 2 based purely on what these sources tell us, what should you really be considering?
Well, you're looking at a console that can definitely play more demanding games, looks better in handheld mode, has more built-in storage, and adds new social features like game chat. The backward compatibility means most of your existing library should come with you, which is a huge plus. The main considerations on the other side are that significantly higher price point for both the console and the games, and those specific, though perhaps minor for most people, backward compatibility limitations we talked about. Certain games, charging old controllers, that sort of thing.
It really sounds like a trade-off between those tangible upgrades and the increased cost, plus maybe some minor new complexities to manage.
Precisely. It's the Switch concept evolved, really, for the next generation of games and player expectations.
This has been a fantastic deep dive into everything the sources revealed about the Nintendo Switch 2 launch. Thank you so much for bringing us all this material to explore and break down.
Oh, always a pleasure. Glad we could sort through it all.
And for you, thinking about the future of Nintendo hardware based on this launch, considering how Nintendo chose to enhance the core Switch experience and build that backward compatibility via this unique emulation akin to a translation layer.
Hmm.
What does this approach tell us about their long-term vision? Are they maybe moving towards more incremental hardware updates with a really strong focus on carrying your library forward rather than just starting from scratch every single generation?
It's definitely a fascinating question to ponder as the Switch 2 finally enters the market.